Building-related public art has played a prominent part in the shaping of the Swedish welfare state. In Sweden, there are some 2,000 building-related public artworks commissioned by the state during the 20th century, along with several thousand works commissioned by municipalities, regions, and private sector. Today, public art has become an essential element in the modern built cultural heritage, a development that has been strengthened by several government assignments the last 3 years. You may recognize this environment from the Nobel banquet. Art as an integrated part of architecture and construction is a cultural expression deeply rooted in our history. The breakthrough of modernism, however, launched entirely new possibilities for interaction between artists and architects when planning and building for public spaces. A well-known example from the 1920s is the artist Einar Fawcett, who cooperated with the architect Ragnar Östberg for the City Hall in Stockholm. Many early public works were realized and funded through private initiatives, like the Golden Hall in Stockholm. When the so-called 1% rule was introduced in 1937 in Sweden, the administration and funding of this art form became common practice in both state, regional, and municipal sectors. The rule made it possible to use investment money for public art, an important step to make it a natural element in people's daily life. And here you see the proposition from the 1% rule. The following decades, several cities like Stockholm in 1963 also decided to practice the 1% rule. And from this era up till today, the 1% rule has made a great impact on all kinds of public environments in Sweden. In the 50s and 60s, public art became visible in new spaces like playgrounds and subway stations. But when time went by, many of the artworks from this era were torn or roughly changed. The sculpture you see here was inaugurated in 1969 in a playground in central Stockholm. It is today unclear when it disappeared. Towards the end of the 20th century, and with the distance to the modern era, many of the public artworks gradually received a new kind of recognition. Through innovative and interdisciplinary research projects, building-related public art and the modern built heritage was documented and analyzed. The Public Art Agency Sweden and the Swedish National Heritage Board started in 2010 to carry out extensive research and dissemination of knowledge. This slowly changed the perspective on public art and made it successively part of the cultural heritage field. On the other hand, this development also made a number of challenges visible. And here you see a medieval church and Asplund's famous library in Stockholm from the 1920s. I will here shortly present some major initiatives and publications that contributed to this development. In 2006, the Public Art Agency Sweden performed an inventory of all building-related artworks commissioned by the agency between 1937 and 2005. This inventory, published in the report you see to the left, identified central risks relating to ownership, management, and supervision. In 2010, another research project was initiated by the Public Art Agency with support from the Swedish National Heritage Board. This project was presented in 2014 in the book to the right, Public Art, a Cultural Heritage, which since then has been used within courses in art history as well as cultural preservation at several universities in Sweden. As an effect of the mentioned research projects, the Swedish government in 2017 decided in its proposal for the new politics for cultural heritage to highlight the importance of building-related public art as part of our cultural environments. The proposition stressed that public art has played a very prominent part in the shaping of public environments and buildings in Sweden, both physically and as an underpinning idea of welfare spaces. Shortly after the proposition was approved by the Swedish Parliament, the Public Art Agency got a new assignment in 2018 to improve the conditions for preserving and developing public art as cultural heritage for future generations. This project was carried out in close cooperation with the Swedish National Heritage Board and led to the report you see to the left, Building-Related Art, Awareness-Raising Measures for the Management of Public Art as part of the cultural environment. This was also a starting point for the current cooperation between the authorities on how public art can be evaluated as part of the modern built cultural heritage. For example, in connection with planning and building processes. Katrin Melander-Backman will later present this ongoing project. My focus here is to give a brief summary of the report from 2019. In the report, the following challenges were identified. 1. There is insufficient knowledge in how to manage building-related public art as part of our cultural heritage. 2. The roles and responsibilities of the involved parties in the supervision and management are ambiguous. 3. The involved supervisory and management bodies for building-related public art at national, regional and municipal level are not collaborating sufficiently. You see some images here from a student house at the Stockholm University and the work by Gabriel Lester. Management of building-related public art involves at least 4 major key groups, and you see them here as a red, yellow, blue and green circle. A new situation is that professionals within the fields of public art and cultural heritage are required to have an understanding of or expertise in one another's fields. It is also necessary for universities and property owners to increase dissemination and exchange of knowledge. Another challenge notified in the report was that the parties responsible for the supervision and management of the building-related public art are not sufficiently aware of how to implement existing legal and economic instruments. And I think Katrin will say something about the building you see here to the right later. In Sweden, there is a common perception that protection and preservation of public art is regulated by a specific law. This is a misunderstanding, and there is no such law for public art in Sweden. Instead, preservation and protection is regulated through several legal instruments for cultural environment, planning and building, copyright, and property rights. And these instruments affect in different ways the possibilities to achieve the sustainable management and protection of public art. An assessment from the report is that the Planning and Building Act has the most significant importance for setting up guidelines, restrictions, and protective classifications. And to the left here, in the column to the left, you see all the legal instruments and the parties in charge of those and how they can be used to protect and preserve public art. A final notified challenge was that More knowledge is needed on how standards and methods for documenting building-related public art in modern cultural environments can improve the quality of preservation. This is a video work by the Swedish glass artist Inger Roman, inaugurated in 2014, I think. Contemporary work. Nowadays, inventories of building-related public art are implemented on regular basis within the field of public art and among property owners. But to enable preservation and protection in a longer perspective, not only inventories made by the public art sector and property owners are necessary. Also evaluating and selecting processes carried out by the cultural environment sector are of great importance. Without easy digital access to documentation and information, the risk for damage and loss increase. Digital access to information is especially important for architects and antiquarians who often are engaged to describe and analyze cultural, historical and artistical values in planning processes. And here you see a kind of illustration about the documentation process. And you can download the report on the website of the Public Art Agency. Now we'll present 3 case studies from the report. This building is the headquarters for the High Command of the Swedish Armed Forces. It was built in 1970 and designed by the architect Bengt Gate. The artistic design of the courtyard, which includes freestanding sculptures and the 500 square meters roof design, is by the artist Pierre Olofsson. In 2015, the property owner Specialfastigheter faced severe problems with leaking waterproof roof lining. This made it necessary for them to carry out a major inspection, which pointed out the need to reconstruct the roof lining. After conferring with the Public Art Agency and the Swedish National Heritage Board, Specialfastigheter, the property owner, decided to carry out an antiquarian inspection to identify artistic, architectonic, cultural, historical and social values. The antiquarian inspection provided crucial material for Specialfastigheter's decision on the merits and disadvantages of the technical and material measures needed for the long-term reconstruction of the artwork. In 2017, after 2 years of careful reconstruction, in dialogue with the artist's daughter, Olofsson's artwork was inaugurated for the second time. The case study shows a project unique in its technical, financial and artistic scope, but it is also important as a reference point demonstrating how national authorities and property owners can collaborate and agree on the conservation of a central part of a cultural heritage, here in form of 1970s building-related public art and cultural environment. Case study number 2. In recent years, Solna City has applied protective regulations in its development plan to ensure long-term protection of building-related art in Tomteboda, a former mail sorting facility. Tomteboda in Solna outside Stockholm was built in the early 1980s by Byggnadsstyrelsen, the former state property board. It is today private owned and is still one of Sweden's largest office buildings with an interior floor space of some 104,000 square meters. Solna City's development plan from 2017 records the aesthetic value found in the building. The plan also emphasizes the aesthetic and cultural historic value of including public art in this national building project. Moreover, it indicates that planning permission is required prior to any alterations that affect the building-related art listed in the development plan. The City of Solna's interpretation of the Planning and Building Act is of common interest, and this case study shows how the Planning and Building Act can be applied to building-related public art in similar cases in municipal planning. It also demonstrates how artistic, aesthetic, and cultural historic assets can be protected by this law. The last case study from the report is the work Transire by artist Ann Edholm, commissioned by the Public Art Agency in 2005. Since then, the building has been sold to a private property owner, and it has been rebuilt several times in recent years to accommodate the requirements on accessibility and functional needs of the National Courts Administration. New doors have been installed in the middle of the wall painting, and the inner ceilings of both levels have been lowered. Such significant changes that affect building-related public art aesthetically may only take place in consultation with the artist in accordance with the moral rights in the copyright law. In this particular case, there is no indication that the current property owner took any initiatives to inspect or document the artwork with the aid of an art historian or an antiquarian. The waste changes forced the artist in 2020, in accordance with her moral right, to claim that the work should be entirely painted over. And here you see the process when it's painted over. The case study shows that the absence of national coordinated digitalization increased the risk for damages and destruction. I would like to end with a future perspective. It is clear that all the activities carried out the past 15 years in Sweden has partly changed the view on public art as part of cultural heritage. This development has increased our awareness of the artistic, aesthetic, and cultural historical value of modern art works in public spaces. And two examples. One is Gösta Wallmark's Yellow Wall from 1972, that you will hear more about later from Katrin. Hopefully, this development has also increased our capacity today to professionally evaluate contemporary public artworks as an important element of the built cultural environment. Like, for instance, Katarina Gross's sculpture Blue Orange from 2012 in a small city in Sweden called Vara. It's a train station you see here. So, thank you very much for listening.